All right, welcome back to the Time Machine. We're now at Chapter 11, The Palace of Green Porcelain. So let's dive in. I found the Palace of Green Porcelain when we approached it about noon, deserted and falling into ruin. Only ragged vestiges of glass remained in its windows, and great sheets of the green facing had fallen away from the corroded metallic framework. It lay very high upon a turfy down, and looking northeastward before I entered it, I was surprised to see a large estuary, or even creek, where I judged Wandsworth's and Battersea must once have been. I thought then, though I never followed up on the thought, of what might have happened, or what might be happening, to the living things in the sea. The material of the palace proved on examination to be indeed porcelain, and along the face of it I saw an inscription in some unknown character. I thought, rather foolishly, that Weena might help me to interpret this, but I only learnt that the bare idea of writing had never entered her head. She always seemed to me, I fancy, more human than she was, perhaps because her affection was so human. So again, we just get a little detail here about just how ignorant this society is and how far they've fallen down on the evolutionary scale. They can't even read, and they've never even thought about the idea of writing. Within the big valves of the door, which were open and broken, we found, instead of the customary hall, a long gallery lit by many side windows. At the first glance I was reminded of a museum. The tiled floor was thick with dust, and a remarkable array of miscellaneous objects was shrouded in the same grey covering. Then I perceived, standing strange and gaunt at the centre of the hall, what was clearly the lower part of a huge skeleton. I recognized by the oblique feet that it was some extinct creature after the fashion of the Megatherium. The skull and the upper bones lay beside it in the thick dust, and in one place, where rainwater had dropped through a leak in the roof, the thing itself had been worn away. Further in the gallery was the huge skeleton barrel of a brontosaurus. My museum hypothesis was confirmed. Going toward the side, I found what appeared to be sloping shelves, and, clearing away the thick dust, I found the old familiar glass cases of our own time, but they must have been airtight to judge from the fair preservation of some of their contents. Clearly, we stood among the ruins of some latter-day South Kensington. Here, apparently, was the paleontological section, and a very splendid array of fossils it must have been, though the inevitable process of decay that had been staved off for a time, and had, through the extinction of bacteria and fungi, lost 99/100ths of its force, was, nevertheless, with extreme sureness, if with extreme slowness, at work again upon all its treasures. Here and there I found traces of the little people in the shape of rare fossils broken into pieces or threaded in strings upon reeds, and the cases had in some instances been bodily removed by the Morlocks, as I judged. The place was very silent. The thick dust deadened our footsteps. Weena, who had been rolling a sea urchin down the sloping glass of a case, presently came, as I stared about me, and very quickly took my hand and stood beside me. So we just get a sense of this is a museum, and it's got, artifacts of the past, but again, just because of how broken up it is, they're starting to decay once more. And because of the thick dust, we can tell that people haven't been here in quite a long time, and this place is really, really breaking down. And at first, I was so much surprised by this ancient monument of an intellectual age that I gave no thought to the possibilities it presented. Even my preoccupation about the time machine receded a little from my mind. To judge from the size of the place, this palace of green porcelain had a great deal more in it than a gallery of paleontology, possibly historical galleries. It might be even a library. To me, at least in my present circumstances, These would be vastly more interesting than this spectacle of old-time geology in decay. Exploring, I found another short gallery running transversely to the first. This appeared to be devoted to minerals, and the sight of a block of sulfur set my mind running on gunpowder. But I could find no saltpeter, indeed no nitrates of any kind. Doubtless they had deliquesced ages ago. Yet the sulfur hung in my mind and set up a train of thinking. As for the rest of the contents of the gallery, though on the whole they were the best preserved of all I saw, I had little interest. I am no specialist in mineralogy, and I went on down a very ruinous aisle running parallel to the first hall I had entered. Apparently, this section had been devoted to the natural history, but everything had long since passed out of recognition. A few shriveled and blackened vestiges of what had once been stuffed animals, desiccated mummies and jars that had once held spirit, a brown dust of departed plants. That was all. I was sorry for that, because I should have been glad to trace the patent readjustments by which the conquest of animated nature had been attained. Then we came to a gallery of simply colossal proportions, but singularly ill-lit, the floor of it running downward at a slight angle from the end at which I entered. At intervals, white globes hung from the ceiling, many of them cracked and smashed, which suggested that originally the place had been artificially lit. Here I was more in my element, for rising on either side of me were the huge bulks of big machines, all greatly corroded and many broken down, but some still fairly complete. You know, I have a certain weakness for mechanism, and I was inclined to linger among these, the more so as for the most part they had the interest of puzzles, and I could make only the vaguest guesses at what they were for. I fancied that if I could solve their puzzles, I should find myself in possession of powers that might be of use against the Morlocks. So right now, the time traveler is just kind of going through this museum, kind of thinking about what he might be able to use against the Morlocks, and he's not really finding anything. There's nothing that he could use for gunpowder or anything, and these machines he's not really familiar with. He's just kind of curious and interested in them, because that's his character. Let's keep going. Suddenly, Weena became very close to my side. So suddenly that she startled me. Had it not been for her, I do not think I should have noticed that the floor of the gallery sloped at all. The end I had come in at was quite above ground and was lit by rare, slit-like windows. As you went down the length, the ground came up against these windows until at last there was a pit like the area of London House before each, and only a narrow line of daylight at the top. I went slowly along, puzzling about the machines, and had been too intent upon them to notice the gradual diminution of the light, until Weena's increasing apprehensions drew my attention. Then I saw that the gallery ran down, at last, into a thick darkness. I hesitated, and then, as I looked round me, I saw that the dust was less abundant, and its surface less even. Farther away towards the dimness, it appeared to be broken by a number of small, narrow footprints. My sense of the immediate presence of the Morlocks revived at that. I felt that I was wasting my time in the academic examination of machinery. I called to mind that it was already far advanced in the afternoon, and that I had still no weapon, no refuge, and no means of making a fire. And then down in the remote blackness of the gallery, I heard a peculiar pattering, and the same odd noises I had heard down the well. So again, we get this sense of dread. Time is passing. He's too caught up in just checking things out, and he realizes he's got no weapon, no safe place, and no way to make a fire, which we know the Morlocks are scared of, and he's hearing noises. I took Weena's hand. Then, struck with a sudden idea, I left her and turned to a machine from which projected a lever not unlike those in Signal Box. Clambering upon the stand and grasping this lever in my hands, I put all my weight upon it sideways. Suddenly, Weena, deserted in the central aisle, began to whimper. I had judged the strength of the lever pretty correctly, for it snapped after a minute's strain, and I rejoined her with a mace in my hand, more than sufficient, I judged, for any Morlock skull I might encounter. And I longed very much to kill a Morlock or so. Very inhuman, you may think, to want to go killing one's own descendants, but it was impossible, somehow, to feel any humanity in the things. Only my disinclination to leave Weena, and a persuasion that if I began to slake my thirst for murder, my time machine might suffer, restrained me from going straight down the gallery and killing the brutes I heard. So he gets this weapon, and he's ready for the Morlocks. But even more, we see something new in the narrator right here. I'm sorry, in the time traveler right here. He has this urge to kill a Morlock, which he says is kind of inhuman, but at the same time, because of what they are and what they look like, he doesn't see or feel any humanity in them, even though he knows they are human, which is, to me at least, very, very interesting and definitely worth discussion. I'm going to pause here because I worry about running out of time for 15 minutes, so see you in part 2 of Chapter 11.